Long before the maps showed a country called Germany, there was a vast, untamed land. The Romans called it Germania. It was a place of immense forests, dark and deep, stretching further than the eye could see. Great rivers like the Rhine and the Danube cut through this landscape, their waters flowing through misty valleys and past marshy wetlands. This was not a land of grand cities or paved roads. It was a world shaped by nature, raw and powerful. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine, and the silence was broken only by the call of a bird or the rustle of an unseen creature in the undergrowth. This wildness was the cradle of the Germanic peoples, a collection of tribes bound not by a single king but by shared customs, languages, and a fierce love for their freedom. These were not one people but many. The Cherusci, the Chatti, the Suebi, the Marcomanni, their names are like echoes from a distant past. Each tribe had its own territory, its own chieftain, and its own way of doing things. They were a patchwork of communities, sometimes trading peacefully, other times clashing in brutal warfare over land or honor. Their world was small, centered on the village and the clan. Loyalty was everything. It was given not to a distant emperor or a faceless state, but to the family, the chieftain, and the gods of the forest and sky. This fierce independence was etched into their very souls, a product of the land itself. It was a land that demanded strength, resilience, and a deep, unshakable connection to one's own kin. The landscape of Germania was both a provider and a formidable adversary. The dense forests offered timber for building longhouses and wood for fires that kept the biting cold at bay. They were home to wild boar and deer, providing a vital source of food for the hunt. The marshlands and rivers provided fish and reeds, but this same land could be unforgiving. Winters were long and harsh, with heavy snows that could isolate villages for months. Floods could sweep away settlements, and the endless woods could swallow a traveler who lost their way. To survive here, you had to understand the rhythms of the seasons, the secrets of the forest, and the temper of the rivers. It bred a people who were tough, practical, and deeply suspicious of outsiders. This world, so different from the sun-drenched, orderly lands of the Mediterranean, was a mystery to the Romans who stood on the other side of the Rhine. To them, Germania was a place of barbarism, a gloomy wilderness inhabited by savage warriors. They saw chaos where the Germanic peoples saw a complex web of loyalties and traditions. They saw a lack of civilization where there was a culture rich in oral history, mythology, and intricate craftsmanship. The Romans, with their legions, their laws, and their unshakable belief in their own superiority, looked across the river and saw a land ripe for conquest. They failed to understand that the very wildness they despised was the source of the tribe's greatest strength and their unyielding spirit of defiance. Life in a Germanic village was a communal affair built around the longhouse. These were huge timber structures, often shared by an entire extended family, their livestock sometimes housed at one end during the brutal winters. Inside, a central fire pit provided warmth and light, its smoke curling up towards a hole in the thatched roof. Life was lived in public, with little concept of privacy as we know it today. Stories were told around the fire. Histories passed down from one generation to the next, not in books, but through the spoken word. These were tales of heroic ancestors, powerful gods, and mythical beasts that roamed the dark woods. The bonds of kinship were the bedrock of this society, a powerful force that held the community together against the hardships of their world. Their society was structured, but not in the way a Roman would recognize. At the top was the chieftain, a leader chosen for his bravery in battle, his wisdom, and his noble lineage. But he was not an absolute ruler. Important decisions were made in a council or thing, where all free men of the tribe would gather. They would clash their spears against their shields to show approval or shout their dissent. This was a raw and direct form of democracy, a system where every warrior had a voice. Below the chieftains and warriors were the farmers and craftsmen, the backbone of the tribe. And at the very bottom were slaves, often captives taken in raids who had no rights at all. It was a society built for war, where a man's worth was often measured by his skill with a sword and shield. Religion was woven into the fabric of everyday life. The Germanic peoples did not build grand temples of stone. Their sacred places were natural ones, ancient groves of trees, remote clearings, or bubbling springs. Here they made offerings to their gods: Wodan, the All-Father, a god of wisdom, poetry and war; Donar or Thor, the thunder god with his mighty hammer, protector of mankind; and Freya, the goddess of love and fertility. These were not distant, abstract deities. They were powerful, unpredictable forces that influenced every aspect of life, from the success of the harvest to the outcome of a battle. Priests and priestesses interpreted the will of the gods, reading omens in the flight of birds or the casting of runes. Their character, as described by Roman writers like Tacitus, was a study in contrasts. They were praised for their incredible bravery, their loyalty to their leaders, and their strong family values. A warrior who abandoned his chieftain in battle faced a lifetime of shame. But they were also seen as lazy when not at war, prone to heavy drinking and gambling, sometimes even wagering their own freedom on a roll of the dice. They valued honor above all else, and a perceived insult could easily lead to a bloody feud. They were a people of fierce passions, capable of great generosity and hospitality, but also of shocking cruelty. This was the complex, contradictory spirit of the Germanic tribes, a spirit forged in the wild heart of ancient Germania. For decades, the Roman Empire had been pushing its frontiers north and east. The mighty legions, the most formidable fighting force the world had ever known, had crossed the Rhine. They saw Germania not as a homeland for other peoples, but as a territory to be tamed, taxed and absorbed into their vast empire. Under the command of skilled generals, they built forts, laid down roads, and began imposing Roman law on the tribes. The Roman eagle, the symbol of their legionary standards, was planted deep in Germanic soil. To many in Rome, the complete conquest of Germania seemed inevitable, just another step in their relentless march of expansion. It was a matter of when, not if. The Roman governor of this new province was a man named Publius Quinctilius Varus. He was an administrator, not a battle-hardened soldier, and he fundamentally misunderstood the people he was sent to rule. He saw them as conquered subjects and began to levy heavy taxes and enforce Roman laws with a heavy hand. He treated their chieftains with arrogance, ignoring their customs and trampling on their pride. He failed to see the resentment simmering just beneath the surface. The Germanic warriors, who valued their freedom above all else, watched as their world was being dismantled piece by piece. The presence of the Roman legions was a constant humiliation, a daily reminder that they were no longer masters in their own land. In the year 9 AD, Varus was leading 3 of his best legions, the 17th, 18th and 19th, along with auxiliary troops and camp followers, through the dense Teutoburg forest. It was a long, slow-moving column, stretching for miles along a narrow, muddy track. Autumn was setting in, and a relentless driving rain turned the ground into a quagmire. The heavy Roman armor became a burden, the wagons got stuck in the mud, and the legionaries, strung out and unable to form their famous battle formations, became vulnerable. They were marching into a trap, one that had been carefully and brilliantly laid by a man they believed was their ally. The forest, which the Romans saw as a mere obstacle, was about to become their tomb. Suddenly the woods erupted. From all sides, Germanic warriors who knew every tree and every path burst from their hiding places. They let out terrifying war cries that echoed through the rain-soaked trees. Spears and arrows rained down on the shocked and disorganized Roman column. The battle, or rather the slaughter, lasted for 3 days. The legions were trapped, unable to fight effectively, harried and attacked at every turn. They were cut down in their thousands. The proud Roman eagles were captured, a devastating blow to Roman prestige. Varus, seeing that all was lost, fell on his own sword rather than face capture. It was a catastrophe on a scale the Romans had rarely experienced. An entire army had been wiped from existence. The architect of this stunning victory was a man who embodied the clash of 2 worlds. His name was Arminius. He was a prince of the Cherusci tribe, but he had been taken to Rome as a young man, a noble hostage to ensure his tribe's good behavior. In Rome, he had been given a Roman education, granted Roman citizenship, and had even served in the Roman army, rising to the rank of equestrian. He learned the arts of Roman warfare from the inside. He understood their tactics, their discipline, and their weaknesses. But while he wore the uniform of a Roman officer, his heart remained fiercely Germanic. He saw the arrogance of his masters and the suffering of his people, and a plan for liberation began to form in his mind. Arminius played a dangerous double game. He returned to Germania as a trusted ally of Varus, a commander of Germanic auxiliary troops serving the Roman cause. He used his position to gain the governor's complete confidence, all the while secretly forging a grand alliance of tribes. This was his true genius. He managed to unite chieftains who were often bitter rivals, persuading them to put aside their differences and join forces against the common enemy. He convinced them that only through unity could they drive the Romans out. He fed Varus false intelligence about a minor rebellion in a distant part of the province, luring him and his legions away from their secure forts and into the treacherous depths of the Teutoburg forest. The Battle of the Teutoburg forest was not just a military victory, it was a profound psychological blow to Rome. When the news reached the capital, it caused panic. The Emperor Augustus was said to have been devastated, wandering through his palace, banging his head against the walls and crying out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions!" The loss of 3 entire legions and their sacred eagle standards was a humiliation that would haunt the Roman psyche for generations. The battle shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. It proved that the so-called barbarians, when united and well-led, could defeat the mightiest army on earth. The Rhine River, once seen as a temporary stopping point, now became a permanent, heavily fortified border. For the Germanic peoples, Arminius became a legend. He was the great liberator, the man who had saved them from slavery and preserved their way of life. His victory ensured that the lands east of the Rhine would never be fully Romanized. They would develop along their own path, their language, laws and culture remaining distinctly Germanic. While the Romans launched punitive campaigns in the years that followed, they never again attempted a full-scale conquest of Germania. The memory of the Teutoburg forest was too strong. Arminius's rebellion had drawn a line in the sand, a cultural and political frontier that would shape the future of Europe for centuries to come. He had secured a future for a German identity, separate and distinct from the Roman world. In the centuries that followed the Battle of the Teutoburg forest, the political landscape of Germania began to change. The old tribal structures slowly gave way to larger, more powerful confederations. Among the most successful of these were the Franks. Originally a collection of smaller Germanic tribes living along the lower Rhine, they were tough, ambitious and opportunistic. They had a complex relationship with the fading Roman Empire, sometimes serving as mercenaries in Roman armies, and other times raiding deep into Roman Gaul. As the power of Rome weakened throughout the 4th and 5th centuries, the Franks saw their chance. They began to push south and west, not just for plunder, but for land and permanent settlement. A pivotal figure in this rise was a ruthless and brilliant king named Clovis, who came to the throne in 481. He was a pagan, like his ancestors, but he understood the power of the new Christian religion that had taken root in the old Roman province of Gaul. In a stroke of political genius, he converted to Catholic Christianity. This decision won him the support of the Gallo-Roman population and, crucially, the powerful Catholic bishops. It gave his conquest a sense of divine legitimacy. Clovis united the Frankish tribes under his sole rule, often through brutal means, and embarked on a relentless campaign of expansion. He defeated the last Roman governor in Gaul, conquered the Visigoths in the south, and established a vast kingdom that stretched from modern-day France into western Germany. The kingdom of the Franks, known as Francia, was a new kind of entity. It was a fusion of Germanic warrior culture and Roman administrative traditions. The king was a Germanic warlord, surrounded by his loyal warriors. But he also tried to use the remnants of the Roman bureaucracy and legal system to govern his diverse subjects. This blending of cultures was fundamental to the development of medieval Europe. The Franks were no longer just a tribe, they were the masters of a burgeoning empire. Their power and influence grew, making them the dominant force in Western Europe after the final collapse of the Western Roman Empire. They were the heirs to Rome, but on their own terms. This new Frankish power had a profound impact on the Germanic lands east of the Rhine. While Clovis and his successors were focused on Gaul, they also pushed eastward, subjugating other Germanic tribes like the Alemanni and the Thuringians. For the first time, large parts of Germania were brought under the rule of a single powerful king. This was not a unity that came from within, but one imposed by an external, albeit related, Germanic power. The old independence of the tribes was being eroded, replaced by the authority of a distant monarch. The Franks were laying the foundations for a new political order, one that would ultimately give rise to the great empires of the Middle Ages. The Frankish kingdom reached its absolute zenith under the rule of one of the most remarkable figures in European history, Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. He became king of the Franks in 768 and ruled for nearly half a century. He was a man of boundless energy, a brilliant military strategist, a skilled diplomat, and a dedicated patron of learning and the arts. He was physically imposing, with a commanding presence that inspired both loyalty and fear. His ambition was vast. He sought to reunite the scattered lands of the old Western Roman Empire and to build a new Christian empire in its place. He was a warrior king in the old Germanic tradition, spending almost every year of his reign on military campaigns. Charlemagne's conquest dramatically expanded the Frankish realm. He pushed south into Italy, deposing the Lombard kings and making himself their ruler. He fought long and brutal campaigns in Spain against the Muslim Moors. But his longest and most savage war was in the east, against the pagan Saxons of northern Germania. For over 30 years he waged a relentless war to subdue them and convert them to Christianity, often by force. This was a clash of worlds, the organized Christian empire of the Franks against the last major bastion of Germanic paganism. The war was marked by extreme brutality, but in the end Charlemagne was victorious. He had succeeded where the Romans had failed, bringing all the Germanic peoples of the continent under a single rule. The crowning moment of his reign came on Christmas Day in the year 800. While kneeling in prayer at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo III placed a crown on Charlemagne's head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. This was an event of immense significance. It symbolically revived the Roman Empire in the West. But this time its emperor was a German-speaking Frank, not a Latin. It cemented the alliance between the Frankish monarchy and the Catholic Church, creating a powerful new entity that would later be known as the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne was now more than just a king. He was the divinely appointed protector of Christendom, a successor to Constantine and Augustus. Under Charlemagne's rule, there was a brief but brilliant flowering of culture and learning known as the Carolingian Renaissance. He gathered scholars from all over Europe to his court at Aachen in modern-day Germany. They copied ancient manuscripts, reformed handwriting, and established schools and monasteries and cathedrals across the empire. Charlemagne tried to create a standardized system of laws, currency, and administration to bring order and unity to his vast and diverse territories. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if a unified Christian Europe with a distinctly Germanic heart had been forged. He was truly the father of Europe, a figure who laid the political and cultural foundations for the continent's future. The great empire that Charlemagne had built, with his sword and his will, was held together by the force of his personality. It was a personal union, dependent on the loyalty he commanded. The Germanic tradition of inheritance, however, was a powerful and destructive force. Unlike the Roman system, where the empire was seen as a single, indivisible state, the Franks viewed the kingdom as the personal property of the ruler, to be divided among his sons upon his death. Charlemagne himself had planned to divide his empire, and it was only the fact that only one of his sons, Louis the Pious, survived him that kept the realm intact for another generation. But this was only a temporary reprieve from the inevitable fragmentation. Louis the Pious was a deeply religious man, but he lacked his father's political skill and military prowess. He struggled to control his rebellious sons, who were hungry for power and territory. As soon as Louis died in 840, his three surviving sons, Lothair, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald, plunged the empire into a bitter civil war. They fought each other for control of their father's inheritance, tearing apart the unity that Charlemagne had worked so hard to create. The dream of a single, unified Christian empire dissolved in a storm of ambition and fraternal rivalry. The bonds of family were not strong enough to overcome the lure of power and the ancient custom of divisible inheritance. After 3 years of destructive conflict, the brothers finally met at the city of Verdun in 843 to agree on a settlement. The treaty they signed, the Treaty of Verdun, formally partitioned the Carolingian Empire into three separate kingdoms. Charles the Bald received West Francia, the kingdom that would eventually become France. Louis the German received East Francia, the lands that would form the core of the future Germany. And Lothair, the eldest, was given the title of emperor and a long, awkward strip of territory in the middle, stretching from the North Sea down to Italy, known as Middle Francia. This Middle Kingdom was geographically and culturally unstable and would soon disintegrate, becoming a source of conflict between its eastern and western neighbours for the next 1,000 years. The Treaty of Verdun was a landmark moment in European history. It marked the formal end of Charlemagne's united empire and laid the political foundations for the modern nations of France and Germany. The division was not just political, it was also linguistic and cultural. The oaths sworn by the armies of Louis the German and Charles the Bald a year before the treaty were given in early forms of German and French, a clear sign that two distinct identities were already emerging. The dream of a single unified German-speaking realm had been born under Charlemagne, but the Treaty of Verdun ensured that its path would be long and difficult. The seeds of division had been planted, and they would grow deep roots in the German soil. From the ashes of the Eastern Frankish kingdom arose a new and peculiar political entity, the Holy Roman Empire. Officially founded in 962, when the German king Otto the Great was crowned emperor by the Pope, it presented itself as the successor to the empires of Charlemagne and ancient Rome. Its name was grand, suggesting a unified, sacred and powerful state. The reality, however, was far more complex and much weaker. The empire was a vast patchwork of territories in Central Europe, primarily the German-speaking lands, but it was never a centralized nation-state in the modern sense. It was a collection of duchies, principalities, free cities and bishoprics, each with its own ruler and its own interests. The central problem of the Holy Roman Empire was the relationship between the emperor and the powerful local princes. Unlike in France or England, where the monarchs gradually consolidated their power, the German emperors were elected. A small group of powerful nobles and archbishops, known as the prince-electors, chose the emperor. This meant that any candidate for the imperial throne had to bargain with the princes, often granting them more rights, lands and autonomy in exchange for their vote. As a result, while the emperor's title was prestigious, his actual power over his supposed subjects was often very limited. The princes grew stronger and more independent over the centuries, while the central authority of the emperor steadily weakened. This system had a profound effect on the German identity. Instead of fostering a sense of national unity, it reinforced local and regional loyalties. A person from Bavaria thought of themselves as a Bavarian first and a subject of the empire second. A citizen of the free city of Hamburg owed their allegiance to their city council, not to a distant emperor. This created a rich and diverse tapestry of cultures, dialects and traditions across the German lands, but it also prevented the emergence of a single, cohesive German nation. The Holy Roman Empire was, as the philosopher Voltaire would later quip, neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire. It was a loose confederation that preserved the power of local rulers at the expense of national unity. The emperors were also constantly distracted by affairs outside of Germany. Many of them were obsessed with trying to assert their authority over Italy and the papacy in Rome, draining German resources and manpower in costly campaigns south of the Alps. This long and draining struggle with the popes further weakened the emperor's position at home, allowing the princes to consolidate their power even more. The grand, universal ambition of the empire ultimately worked against the creation of a strong German state. While the imperial crown remained a potent symbol, the reality was one of fragmentation. The German lands were a political maze of competing interests, a situation that would have devastating consequences when a new and powerful force of division appeared: religious conflict. In the early 1600s, the growing anger within the Holy Roman Empire was set on fire by a religious change. A German monk and teacher named Martin Luther was upset by the bad things he saw in the Catholic Church. He especially disliked the selling of indulgences. These were papers that promised to make the time a person spent in purgatory shorter. In 1517, he famously nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg. This challenged the Pope's power and said that people could be saved just by having faith. His ideas spread quickly because of the new printing press. Many Germans liked his ideas because they were tired of sending their money to Rome and being ruled by Italian popes. The Reformation had started. Luther's challenge split the German lands apart. Many powerful princes saw the Reformation as a great chance to get more power for themselves. By becoming Protestant, they could take over rich church lands, stop the Pope from getting involved in their business, and show they were independent from the Catholic Emperor Charles V. This turned a religious argument into a big political problem. Germany became the main place of the fight. It split into a Protestant north and a mostly Catholic south. The religious togetherness that had kept the empire united, even if not perfectly, was broken. Faith became another reason for division, making princes fight princes, city fight city, and neighbor fight neighbor. These tensions eventually exploded into one of the most brutal and destructive wars in European history, the 30 Years' War, from 1618 to 1648. What started as a rebellion in Bohemia turned into a fight across the whole continent, mostly fought on German land. Armies from Sweden, France, Spain, and Denmark marched back and forth across Germany, stealing, burning, and killing. The war was a disaster. Whole areas were destroyed, and it's thought that up to a third of the German people died from violence, hunger, and sickness. When the war finally ended with the Peace of Westphalia, the Holy Roman Empire was just an empty shell. The agreement officially said that individual princes had the power to decide the religion of their own states. This made Germany's political and religious split permanent. The dream of a united Germany seemed farther away than ever. The land was broken, scarred by war, and divided by faith and politics. The Holy Roman Empire would continue for another 150 years. But it was an empire only in name, and yet through all the centuries of division, something stayed the same. The people shared a language, a rich culture of stories and music, and the heroic memory of people like Arminius. They shared the history of Charlemagne and the experience of the Reformation. The hope for unity, for one German nation where all the different parts could finally come together, did not die. It became a powerful, deeply felt desire, a dream that would stay alive in the hearts of poets, thinkers, and patriots, waiting for the day when it could finally become real.